Imagine checking your bank account after months of careful spending and realizing the balance has finally reached a few $1,000s. It feels like progress, yet the idea of reaching 10,000 still seems distant, almost abstract, as if there is an invisible barrier that slows momentum just as savings begin to grow. Many people experience this stage in their financial journey, where the first meaningful buffer takes far longer to build than expected, not because of a lack of effort, but because early savings must compete with the full gravity of everyday expenses. The concept behind this feeling is partly mathematical and partly psychological. In the early phase of saving, every dollar comes directly from income that is already committed to housing, food, transportation, and other necessities. There is very little assistance from time or compounding at this stage, which means progress depends almost entirely on the difference between earnings and spending. When that difference is narrow, growth appears slow, even when behavior is consistent and disciplined. From a behavioral economics perspective, the brain interprets this slow progress in a particular way. Humans naturally respond to visible momentum. When outcomes accelerate, motivation tends to increase, but when progress moves in small increments, the reward signal is weaker even if the trajectory is positive. As a result, early saving stages often feel disproportionately difficult compared to later stages, where compounding begins to participate in the process. The math helps explain why this shift eventually occurs. When someone moves from zero savings to a few $1,000s, the entire change must come from active contributions. However, once a larger base exists, small percentage changes begin to produce visible movement on their own. Even modest returns or interest begin interacting with the balance, creating the first signs that time itself is beginning to assist the process. This transition is not about dramatic growth, but about changing the structure of how money behaves. Before a financial buffer exists, every unexpected expense interrupts progress and forces savings to restart. After a buffer develops, those interruptions are absorbed without resetting the entire system. Stability gradually replaces volatility, and decisions become less reactive because timing pressure begins to ease. Historical patterns in personal finance show that households with even modest emergency reserves often experience lower long-term financial stress, not necessarily because their income is higher, but because the presence of a buffer alters how economic shocks are handled. Instead of triggering borrowing or delayed payments, small disruptions are contained within the reserve, preventing a cascade of additional costs. In this sense, the first $10,000 functions less like a milestone and more like a structural shift in financial behavior. It represents the point where money begins to create flexibility rather than only solving immediate needs. Time becomes an ally rather than an opponent, and decision-making expands beyond the next bill or expense. Understanding this dynamic reframes the early saving stage as a mechanical phase rather than a motivational failure. The slow beginning reflects the mathematics of starting from zero and the psychology of progress perception. Once a financial base exists, even a modest one, the system begins to behave differently, allowing stability and optionality to gradually replace the constant urgency that often defines the earliest stage of building financial resilience.